when the calm rhythm of your flight is shattered by an announcement that freezes every heart in its seat. The captain's voice fades, panic stirs, and suddenly all eyes turn. Not to the crew, but to you. One passenger. One decision. A moment. That would decide not just your fate, but the fate of every soul on board. Row 9 was quiet. A man sat alone, gazing absently out the oval window. The world below stretched in silence. Patchwork clouds, streaks of sunlight, a horizon, endless and serene. He was a passenger like any other, blending into the fabric of anonymity that exists on flights. No one gave him a second glance. He carried no badge, no authority, just another traveler, minding his own journey. The hum of engines filled the cabin, a steady lull that made passengers drowsy. The man's hands rested calmly on the armrest, but inside a storm lingered, a past he had left behind years ago, a skill buried deep, something he hoped never to be called upon again. Then, the shift. It began subtly. The attendants whispered more than usual. A cart was abandoned mid-aisle. The usual smiles stretched thin. Something was wrong. Passengers began to sense it, the unease, the subtle tightening of the air. He felt it too, the way instinct senses a storm before it breaks. Minutes passed, and then she came. The flight attendant, her steps quicker than usual, her face pale beneath practiced calm. She leaned close, lowering her voice, her words almost trembling, but meant, "Only for him, we need you now." The sentence struck him harder than turbulence ever could. He froze. The past rushed forward like a flood, memories he had locked away. For years he had walked away from it all, determined never to carry the weight again. And yet, here, 30,000 feet in the air, that past had found him. For a moment the man didn't move. He sat quietly, absorbing the enormity of what was being asked. Around him, passengers carried on in restless ignorance, unaware of the storm gathering just beyond the cockpit door. But in row 9, stillness ended. Slowly, deliberately, he unbuckled his seatbelt. The hum of the engines continued, but it no longer sounded the same. To him, it was a reminder of what was at stake. A reminder that sometimes fate doesn't ask permission, it demands an answer, and his answer would come. He followed the attendant down the narrow aisle, the shuffle of his shoes muted against the carpet. Around him, passengers tilted their heads with curiosity, but none dared to ask. He was just another man in row 9. What could he possibly offer? The cabin lights flickered as the aircraft cut through a pocket of turbulence. Drinks quivered in plastic cups. A baby cried somewhere in the back. The sound carried thin and sharp like the warning of what was coming. They reached the cockpit door. Another attendant stood there, arms crossed tightly, eyes betraying the calm she tried to wear. The man paused, feeling the weight of what lay beyond. It wasn't just a room. It was a threshold. Once he crossed it, there would be no returning to anonymity. The door opened. Inside, chaos had a face. The captain slumped in his chair, pale, unmoving, breathing shallow, as though each breath might be his last. The co-pilot, young and wide-eyed, fought desperately with the controls, his voice low but frantic as he checked instruments and gauges that glowed an unforgiving red. Warning lights blinked like a heartbeat in crisis. The man's stomach dropped. He knew this world, every dial, every switch, every sound. Years ago he had lived here, commanded here, thrived here. But he had walked away, leaving the sky behind, convinced he'd never return. Now, 30,000 feet above Earth, it had returned for him. He lowered himself into the vacant seat. The headset waited. The yoke loomed before him. His hands hesitated, trembling with the weight of memory. For a second he felt like an imposter. Too many years had passed. Could he still do this? But then his hands closed around the controls. Muscle memory stirred. Old instincts flickered back to life. He exhaled deeply, grounding himself in the storm. In that moment, the man in row 9 was no longer a passenger. He was something else. Something the plane desperately needed, and yet as he scanned the instruments he saw it, the true threat. Not just a sick captain, not just turbulence, something darker. The plane was in trouble and time was running out. The cockpit was alive with alarms, altitude warnings, system alerts, each sound a reminder that danger was layered, stacked like the clouds outside. The co-pilot's hands were shaking, his voice cracking as he tried to steady the situation. The man in row 9? No, not row 9 anymore, not just a passenger, leaned forward, steadying his breath. He had flown through storms, navigated nights without stars, and landed machines heavier than mountains on runways slick with rain. But this was different. Years had dulled the sharpness of his edge. Could he still cut through disaster? Memories flashed like lightning. A younger version of himself, confident and unshakable. Long hours in simulators, endless drills, his crew laughing at his steady hands, his calm voice. He remembered their trust. He remembered the last flight, the one that broke him. A mistake, small but unforgiving, one he had never spoken of. It had driven him from the sky, left him grounded by guilt heavier than gravity itself. Now the sky demanded him back. The co-pilot glanced at him, desperate, searching his face for assurance. The man gave none, only silence. His focus locked. On the instruments, the aircraft trembled. The passengers behind the door had no idea how close they were to the edge. He whispered to himself, not words, but a promise. If fate had given him this moment, he would not waste it. Not again, and so he began, hands moving over switches, eyes scanning the horizon, pulling the aircraft back from the chaos. With every movement, the ghost of his past pressed against him, and with every correction, he pushed back. For the first time in years, he was not running from the sky. He was fighting with it. The cabin behind them had grown restless. Attendants moved quickly, securing passengers, calming nerves. They knew the truth, something was wrong. People can sense fear, even when it hides behind practiced smiles. Inside the cockpit, sweat ran down the man's temples. His shirt clung to his back. His heart thudded, not from panic but from responsibility. He wasn't flying for himself, not anymore. Every soul on this plane, every stranger strapped to their seat, had unknowingly placed their lives in his hands. 180 lives. 180 stories, each heartbeat now tied to his. The weather worsened. Thunder growled outside the windows, flashes of lightning illuminating the endless dark. Rain lashed against the fuselage like a warning. The storm wasn't just weather. It was judgment, testing his resolve, daring him to falter. His hands tightened on the controls. He thought of his family, of the life he had built away from the cockpit. They had never truly known why he had left the skies. But now, sitting here fighting for strangers, he felt that perhaps fate was giving him a chance, not just to save lives, but to save himself. And so, he fought harder. Time bent in the cockpit. Minutes stretched like hours. The co-pilot's panic had softened, replaced with trust. The man's presence steadied him like a lighthouse in a storm. Then the radio crackled. Control towers far below, their voices strained but calm, guided him with coordinates, vectors, headings. They didn't question who he was. They didn't need to. His voice carried authority, even through the static. He charted the course toward the nearest runway. But the storm wasn't done. Wind battered the plane, pulling it sideways, rattling every bolt, shaking every passenger into prayer. Oxygen masks trembled above their heads, ready to fall. The descent began. The nose tilted, the earth rising to meet them. Through the windshield, he saw nothing but darkness broken by streaks of lightning. No runway, no lights, just faith. His breath steadied. His hands gripped the yoke. This was the moment, the razor's edge between survival and tragedy. Behind him, in the silence of row 9, his abandoned seat waited. A reminder that sometimes the quietest among us are carrying the heaviest burdens. The wheels screamed as they met the runway. A violent jolt shook the aircraft. The storm fought to drag it sideways, but his hands held firm, guiding steel and souls toward salvation. Then, silence. The engines roared down, brakes engaging, the monstrous machine finally surrendering its momentum. And then, impossibly, they stopped. Still. Safe. Alive. The cabin erupted. Not in cheers, not at first, just stunned relief. Tears, gasps, sobs, strangers embracing strangers. A collective exhale from those who had brushed against death and lived to tell of it. He removed the headset slowly, his chest rising with the heaviest breath of his life. The co-pilot stared at him, eyes wide with gratitude. The attendants, their faces streaked with tears, looked at him as though he had pulled them back from the abyss. But he asked for nothing. No recognition, no applause. He left the cockpit quietly, returning down the aisle. Row 9 awaited him, empty, patient, as though it had always known he would return. He sat, buckled the belt, rested his trembling hands on his lap. To the passengers, he was just a man again, anonymous, invisible, one face among many. But inside he knew. The sky had given him one final test. And this time, he had passed. The quiet man in row 9 was quiet once more, but the world above the clouds would never forget him.